What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, we are so close. We are so close. Less than 2 weeks away from week 0. We are at this time 2.5 weeks away from week 1. We don't wish time away in this life, but we're officially at mid-August, and that is counting down the days time officially. I know a lot of people do it inside 100. I do it right now, and I'm excited on this Wednesday morning.
I feel like I'm so excited about college football generally that I have just overwhelming hopium. So if you're, a Tennessee fan or a Kentucky fan or something, and you want to just run a take by me, I'll co-sign. If you want to tell me Tennessee's winning the SEC and you got a good explanation for it, I'm ready, because I'm ready to believe in everybody's team right now.
And this is a very fitting podcast to do at this time of year when hopium is, I think, at its all-time high. I realize that talking season is another time, but once you see the clips and there's confirmation bias with training camp and all those different things, it reaches different levels. So today, this is the plan. We're doing chaos scenarios. We will be mapping those out just as we've done at least have we done it the last 2 years? We might have done this each of the last 2 years. Definitely we did it last year. I'm going to say we did it the last 2 years. I feel like this is the third year that we've done chaos scenarios. And then we've also got the executive producer of Any Given Saturday, Paul Martin, coming on to talk about his unique vantage point of all things SEC, the documentary on Netflix that if you are listening to this, you've probably already binged all 7 episodes at this point. So we will get to that great interview with him and then Lad of the Week. But first, just as we've been doing all offseason, got to talk to you guys about Dabble. Dabble is the newest daily fantasy space that you should be getting involved on. All the action. We have done a lot of different Dabble ads where we've talked about getting Major League Baseball, getting all the different picks you can possibly have for NBA playoffs as well that were huge this summer. And I know Dabble has done a great job of being able to make their social function second to none. They offer a wide variety of sports for being able to make those picks. We're going to have football coming up. It's going to be a great place to do that. Use the promo code SDS2 when you sign up today. Receive $10 in bonus cash. No deposit required. That is promo code SDS2 for $10 in bonus cash, courtesy of the good folks at Dabble. Will, let's talk chaos. Do we need to define what chaos is before we get into this?
I think to be safe, we should.
Okay. Chaos is not necessarily one thing happening to one specific team and it only impacting one team. When I think chaos as it relates to college football, I think of, oh man, this is going to impact a lot of people. And not just, what if Indiana goes 8-4 this year? That's not really going to impact that many people. With all due respect to the great people at Auburn, Hugh Freeze going 7-5 this year, probably not really chaotic, in my opinion. There are a lot of other ways in which Auburn can do things that would impact the rest of college football, being really, really good and having one of those Auburn seasons, or being really, really bad and having a very attractive vacancy would be one of those ways that it could impact other college football fan bases.
And, it feels like, when you add a fish to the fish tank, like we need that from Auburn. That's what I feel like has been missing with Auburn is they've been so boring. I need them to be laughably bad or shockingly good. Like they have a role in this fish tank of the SEC that I feel like they're not fulfilling right now.
You don't feel like a coup is chaotic?
Now that the coup was chaotic, but since the coup, it's kind of been like hire Hugh Freeze and be kind of mid,
They would take mid at this point. They
Fair.
definitely would. Based on the feedback that I got from Auburn fans with my 6-6 crystal ball projection, they would not exactly be thrilled with that season. Many kind tweets. Thank you, Auburn fans, for that. Clemson fans last year, I remember, pushed back a lot on when I suggested Dabo Swinney could step down as a chaos scenario. And for what it's worth, that wasn't me saying I believe Dabo Swinney is going to step down at season's end. These are chaos scenarios, and they are things that could actually happen, and they would have a huge chain reaction. So that's kind of the point of doing something like this, is to figure out what can get us the craziest version of a college football season that feels like it's actually in play. Now, we're not going to sit here and predict that every team that's just been historically awful is going to come out of nowhere and become relevant, because obviously like those things can happen in a given year. You kind of expect them to happen, and the expanded playoff maybe yields that a little bit more than it did in years past. But we like mapping these out because it's a good indicator of how chaotic a season actually is, instead of just throwing that out lazily in mid-October and saying, wow, this season's been absolutely wild so far, when in reality, if a lot of these chaos scenarios haven't hit, it's probably not that wild.
What would you say were the most chaotic things that actually happened last year?
We got a few hits. I had, if a team with multiple losses wins a national title, that was a chaos scenario. That happens with Ohio State. And that was chaotic because teams with multiple losses get buried when they suffer that second loss. And then maybe winning a title that way would perhaps tweak the approach that others in college football have to being able to kind of think more long-term. And we already heard Sark talk about how he thinks that there's never going to be an undefeated team again. If there is, there should be a statue for them. So that was one that hit. I had, what if Quinn Ewers gets hurt again?
Stayed hurt.
Didn't stay hurt that long, got hurt again, and then, not re-injured, but suffered a new unrelated injury to the one he had in the first part that actually knocked him out. But obviously the Arch Manning factor and what that would create, I would argue that was chaotic. There are a lot of people saying, hey, look, maybe Arch should be starting. Maybe Arch could lead Texas to a national championship and Quinn Ewers can't. So that was one. And then this is, looking back, I don't really like this one. I'm kind of trying to get away from this. I had traditional powers are back after a breakthrough win. And I thought there were a lot of different teams you could point to last year with the preseason conversations about them and think that was on the table. USC, Miami, Nebraska, Penn State, and Notre Dame. Those were the five that I really put in that group. And Notre Dame had the breakthrough victory by virtue of beating Georgia, beating Penn State to be able to get to a national championship. While I would argue others on that list might have had moments, but they didn't ultimately have those breakthrough we're back type wins.
USC had breakthrough bookends. They started and finished the year with breakthrough wins, but the middle was kind of, don't worry about that. Yeah.
True. Maybe some would consider the LSU game a breakthrough win for them. Didn't prove to be the case, but nonetheless, still at least maybe had a couple of those moments. And then also I had, what if Colorado makes it to a bowl game? And that hit, and the chaos that it yielded was Travis Hunter very much at the forefront of the Heisman Trophy conversation, ends up winning the Heisman Trophy. The Shedeur Sanders discourse that ensued was very much chaotic in really the entire football conversation, not just limited to college football. So I would argue that there were a few of those that played out, but ultimately did it yield 2007 levels of chaos last year? I would say no. I would say we fell short of that.
Yeah, especially with the playoff being as chalky as it was. But I will say Colorado was one of the most, if not the most chaotic team of all time, because the thing about them is every time we thought we had them figured out, we were wrong, right? So it's like people were too low and then they beat a couple of teams, and then people were too high, and Arizona State won their conference. And is Shedeur a Deion merchant, or is Deion a Shedeur merchant? Or like, is Travis Hunter, should he play defense? It's wrong if he plays offense. It's wrong if he plays defense. It's stupid if you didn't think he could play both. Now he's in the NFL. So like, that's the funny thing, is on a week-to-week basis, Colorado was just creating new chaos.
Do you consider Arizona State winning the Big 12 the way that it did a chaos scenario? Because I think I could argue both sides of this.
I think absolutely. If you look at the preseason media polls, which they've now done away with, obviously, but if you look at what they were projected to do, we talked about this on the last pod, where it's like when they played Mississippi State, it was like, that's embarrassing, and then by the end of the year, it's like they're rolling good teams. They really played Texas tight.
I think it created a chaos scenario, not just because it ended the Big 12 media poll as we know it, but also it kind of created what the Big 12 has become and how they're viewed nationally. If you can be predicted to finish last and all of a sudden you win that conference, and we've had different interpretations of what that actually means. I view it as more of a positive for America's conference, but yeah, I mean, the chaos that it created, maybe a little bit more limited from a regional standpoint, but that's just kind of what we're going to expect year to year from the Big 12 now. So definitely some chaos came from that, I think for sure. All right, 10 chaos scenarios. This is how we're going to do this. Some of which a little bit more topical than others. First one, very, very topical. Chaos scenario number 1, Will. A prominent starting quarterback has a potentially illegal Venmo transaction go viral. For those who missed the story that went viral on Monday night, John Mateer, the new Oklahoma quarterback, former Washington State quarterback, had a Venmo transaction that read sports gambling, USC versus UCLA from 3 years ago. I'm sure the Texas fan who found that transaction was just casually scrolling Venmo as one does on a Monday night.
So Venmo is the stupidest social media. I'll tell you as a social media guy, many would tell you LinkedIn. I'm here to tell you right now, no one should know how you're spending your money. Right now, if you're listening to this podcast, as I'm sure many of you had this thought on Monday or Tuesday when you saw the story, you can make those private and you absolutely should.
Yeah, just do it. Just do it because what's the upside in having it public? I don't even think I've sent a just straightforward emoji description for a Venmo transaction in the entire time that I've had Venmo. So I'll side with John Mateer for saying it's an inside joke. We'll give him a little bit of leniency with that. Oklahoma,
Connor, you'd be the worst crime accomplice of all time. You'd be like robbery 11, 13, 245 on your Venmo.
Nah, like they are right though, and that you can't. It's not like he has a DraftKings history or something like that is going to be checked out, because if you're just betting between your buddies or something like that, it's really hard to enforce that. You know, like when I'm sitting there betting my college roommate whether or not LSU is going to cover a 5-point spread on the 3:30 CBS game, and if I were to pay him money, that's a little bit harder to like find the paper trail for. And I wouldn't really have a ton of faith in the NCAA to do that, considering they're just getting around to waiver requests. So
this one is almost so on the nose that I feel like he could get out of it, because it's like, yeah, guys, I was betting on USC UCLA. That's what that means. Okay, yeah, that wasn't a joke between me and my friends. That's like I said, it's like I committed a robbery. I'm gonna go post it on Twitter.
Look, if he did it, and if that was really his description, lesson learned to everyone: just don't. Pretty obvious, but very fitting for 2025. And as bizarre as it is, it did serve as a reminder of the dumb stuff that can happen that would have massive, massive implications, because nobody had to worry about something like that 20 years ago. Like 20 years ago, USC players didn't even realize that people had camera phones at parties. You know, times have changed just a little bit. So make your Venmo transactions private is a clear and obvious thing. Maybe just literally any other emoji related to gambling with your friends, I would say, is a smart idea. But yeah, just seeing someone who's viewed as one of the top returning quarterbacks in the sport, having the internet buzzing and wondering, is he about to face a significant punishment for this? Could he have just ruined an opportunity because he maybe bet $10 on a random game when he was a freshman at Washington State? And as Joel Klatt pointed out, how ironic that is in this day and age of college athletics, with the money that's being handed out left and right, that we would get up in arms about something like that. The bigger question though, Will, did John Mateer bet on Lincoln Riley?
That's what we got to know. It's like they got to offer like amnesty and be like, so what, did you win? Like, just tell us. Like, just tell us if you won and we'll let you go.
And alternatively, if you bet against Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma fans are banging the drum for him even more.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just obvious. And if he did bet on Lincoln Riley to win a football game, or at least to cover a spread, what does that say about his commitment to Oklahoma? You know, people are wondering.
Mm-hmm.
Could be a deal breaker. So that's chaos scenario number 1. Chaos scenario number 2.
Wait, hold on. Which QB would you most like to see their Venmo transactions?
Active in college football?
Yeah.
Diego Pavia.
Diego, the all-time is obviously Garcia. I think that would be electric if that was a thing back then. I don't think it was, but yeah, I think Diego's would be very fun, especially because he's got that NIL money. He probably gets the boys all kinds of dinners and stuff. Yeah,
Diego's would be fascinating. I don't know what kind of variance you would get to it, but it would definitely be a lot of those. And oh man, he dropped $500 on buying his offensive line dinner or something like that. Any high profile quarterback would be really interesting from that standpoint. But yeah, Garcia's Garcia's would go in a few different directions.
Yep.
I don't think there'd be any doubt about that. Chaos scenario number 2. James Franklin stops being James Franklin. That's chaotic. That's definitely chaotic. You knew I was going to get here. I puked in my mouth when I saw that Penn State missed out on being the preseason number 1 team in the AP poll by the closest margin of the 21st century. A team that lost 13 consecutive games to AP top 5 teams, a team that has a head coach that's 4-20 versus AP top 10 teams at his current job, a team that lost its best player on both sides of the ball, a team that hasn't beaten Ohio State since 2016. But instead, we've got people saying, well, now's their chance because Ohio State and Oregon have a lot of questions. Buddy, that is not why you rank a team number 1 in the country.
It's so funny because forever we joked about this with Ohio State, where they would find a way to choke and not even make the playoff, which would have happened every year other than this year, obviously, with the season they just had. But it's like people are using the transitive property and being like, actually, now that means we believe in Penn State. It's like, buddy, even within the context of last season, you really shouldn't have believed in Penn State.
I don't get it. It's frustrating me as much as any preseason discussion in recent memory. It just blows me away. James Franklin's never finished as a top 4 coach, as a top 4 team in college football. And people are like, oh, you got to put him number 1. No, you don't. No, you don't. I understand you like the backfield. I understand that you think that Drew Aller is better than he actually is. That's fine. That's all well and good. Jim Knowles, great hire. Great hire. Love that.
With defense and running backs and all that. Penn State's had that pretty much our whole lives. It hadn't done anything for them.
It just bothers me. Only 6 active FBS head coaches have a worse winning percentage against AP top 10 teams than James Franklin. Imagine the outrage if an SEC coach got that type of benefit of the doubt. Just imagine that.
Hold on. Do you have that list? I'm sorry. The 6 that with worse records? Because I would love to know that.
I tweeted this out the other day. Got a decent amount of play. All right. I'm going to whip this out here. And there's a game minimum. That's a key caveat here. Mm-hmm. So in the playoff era, these are the active FBS head coaches, active keyword there, that have the worst record against AP top 10 teams, minimum of 10 games. Derek Mason is the absolute worst at 0-13. That's Vandy. Sure. Matt Rule, 0-10. Clark Lee, 1-10. Who did the 1 come against? Justin Wilcox, 1-10. Mark Stoops, 3-18. Sam Pittman, 2-11. James Franklin, 4-20.
He's allowed 2-11 out of Sam Pittman, and the Mark Stoops one, disappointed but not surprised.
Yeah, I think we could all understand situations inherited there and kind of chalk it up to that. Like when you inherit a program from Chad Morris or you're at Vandy. And by the way, those are not James Franklin Vandy numbers. Okay. Yeah. Like those are just Penn State. That's why I picked the playoff era, because he's been at Penn State since 2014.
Yeah. Like if we wanted to be mean, we could say, think about the amount of times he's been on the sideline watching his team get crushed by a top 10 team, but you're being even more fair than that, honestly.
Yeah. He's 0-5 against top 10 teams at Vandy. We don't need to include that. Chaos is James Franklin beating Ohio State.
Facts.
It's beating Ohio State for the first time since 2016, and he's never beaten them in Columbus. But I wouldn't bank on that, because in true road games against AP top 25 teams at Penn State, he's 2-13. This is not the man who should be leading the number 1 team in college football going into a season. If they get there, that's a different discussion. But if Penn State wins a national championship, it'll have to beat as many AP top 10 teams this year as James Franklin has beat and his entire time as a head coach. Anyway, chaos scenario number 3. A contender loses a starting quarterback for the year. A little bit vague. I have a point with this. This is similar to chaos scenario number 1 with John Mateer, but a little bit different. I bring this up because I think the way that rosters are constructed now, with how much you have to pay your starting quarterback and the freedom that backups now have to play immediately elsewhere and not have to sit a year, I think it's become harder and harder to have a true next man up backup quarterback. As much as coaches would like to say that they have that, I don't know that that is as obvious as it was in previous eras of the sport. And here's a wild stat that needs some context. In the first 8 years of the playoff era, Will, half of the national titles were won by quarterbacks who were week 1 backups that season. Okay. Cardale Jones, 2014, third string quarterback to start the year. Tua Tagovailoa, 2017. Trevor Lawrence, 2018. Stetson Bennett IV in 2021. You could look at that and assume that it doesn't necessarily wipe out a contender if their starting quarterback goes down, and maybe that's true. But I do think it's more likely that we won't see that scenario play out in the rest of the decade than we see it play out once or twice. Cardale Jones is not sticking around to be the third string quarterback at Ohio State in this era of college football. Like, he's finding a way to play elsewhere. That's just not happening. Tua and Trevor Lawrence, insanely talented true freshmen who were both mature, blessed with incredible surroundings, and they are the outliers. They really are. Not to say they can't happen again, but I don't think we should assume that guys will be as ready as those two guys were. Stetson Bennett might have taken that 2020 sample size that was up and down. There was a moment in 2020 where Stetson Bennett had the mailman storyline and the t-shirts were printed, and shout out Breaking T, and everybody was kind of on board with that storyline. And then he ends up losing the job. He wasn't healthy that full year, but he could have parlayed that 2020 opportunity into being able to transfer elsewhere and had an opportunity to play immediately. But I just also think his college career is an extremely unique situation that we probably shouldn't assume is going to be the norm. I won't completely rule out one of those types of arcs resurfacing for a backup quarterback for a national championship team, but it would be chaos if all of a sudden, let's say Ryan Puglisi at Georgia is asked to step in.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's asked to step in for Gunnar Stockton, or Austin Mack or Keelan Russell is asked to step in for Ty Simpson, or Austin Novosad at Oregon is asked to step in for Dante Moore. Yeah, there's a household name for you. What if Arch goes down?
Connor came to play today, folks.
We got names.
Mm-hmm.
We got names today. I mean, it could. Who knows? These are the types of things that would all of a sudden make everybody go, well, is this team about to follow the Ohio State path of 2014? Or could they do, is it a situation where it's just a younger, more talented guy like what we saw with Trevor Lawrence in 2018? That still creates chaos in itself to lose something like that. And in this day and age, maybe it would create more panic knowing that it's kind of harder to feel like you have a really good situation with your backup quarterback.
Yes, I will give one caveat to that. I think it's harder to keep the future of your franchise kind of in the building and on board, right? And we've seen guys get thrown into the fire. That's kind of been a historic thing with college football, but certainly it feels like we were seeing the little bit of Lagway, the little bit of Arch Manning, right? A little bit more frequently. But I will say the actual clipboard holding career backup guy is kind of coming to college football. I know this guy wasn't very good last year, but like Drew Pine is an example. We talked about Harrison Bailey in Florida the other day. So I think that guys actually have a career in college football as a backup. It's what probably Zach Calzada should have been if Kentucky didn't exist, And so I do think that would be a smart thing to have on your roster if you have one of these like big name quarterbacks.
Jacob Zeno at UAB, who could have probably just decided I'm going to go become anything I want to be in my mid-20s now and just start my professional life. And instead, he has a market because he's got a year of eligibility, and a program like A&M is able to say to him, come be our backup here, and we'll put you in a good spot. You're still going to be considered a backup. I don't know how clear that communication is from Mike Elko, who is very clearly a fan of Jacob Zeno, which we've talked about throughout the offseason. But you're right in that maybe that guy exists in a way that he didn't in the previous era. And maybe that could be the saving grace for some of these teams that have been able to do that. I think it's really hard to get that. Mm-hmm. I think it's really, really hard. You look at some of these depth charts with the backup quarterbacks, and as I just laid out with some of those guys who are household names, and people realize they're the guy and they've been paid like the guy. And to get that guy to come on board is hard. It's really hard to sign up for that, knowing that you're going to need an injury to break right for you. Or maybe you play at the FCS level or at a group of 5 school or something like that. That can be your opportunity with so many different ways to get seen in this day and age. So it's a complicated thing to figure out, but I just think backup quarterbacks, if you got a really good one, I think you're going to be in the minority in this day and age.
Yeah, and I think you just hit on it too, where it's like the NIL opportunity. It's something I feel like Brian Kelly has done well at LSU, where he had Nussmeier just waiting, has Van Buren now, right? And I think if there's a coach that is respected kind of in that way in an offensive side of the ball, it's like, well, if my future is to be kind of a I'm talking about for the older guys, not for those guys specifically, because those guys were kind of a middle ground where they really could play somewhere and they really, could play at LSU too. So it's a little bit different. But point being, like, if your future isn't coaching, maybe you see some of these better coaches. Like, that's something if Saban were still around, he would just have a great quarterback room of these older guys who want to go coach for Saban when they retire. So it's just something worth monitoring as we go forward.
Basically what he tried to do with Gardner Minshew.
Yep.
And Gardner Minshew then gets recruited by Mike Leach, says, come lead the nation in passing.
Sure.
Smart. Really smart move. Chaos scenario number 4. One of the 4 SEC favorites misses the playoff. Something obvious, but all of which would be chaos. A little bit different for different reasons, but those 4 SEC contenders, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and Texas. Any one of those misses the playoff, and I can tell you that there would be massive, massive panic. Bama and LSU would have, man, is this bad money that we spent on these head coaches? I don't think their head coaches would be fired, but would this be really, really bad money? And are we just now in a spot where we're going to have to eventually eat a big time check for guys that don't have the upside that we thought that they had when we hired them? Those would be the questions and conversations. Georgia fans would wonder if this is a bit like what Clemson endured. Yearly title contender, looking like a 10 to 15 year golden age where you have the best coach in the sport. And
Connor's going to be saying, is Kirby Smart stepping down?
No, we're not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
We're not, unless Kirby resists the changing nature of the sport in ways that Dabo has so publicly done year after year. Then we can have those conversations. We will not be speculating at that as a chaos scenario.
Kirby's in the back cloning Branch Brothers. He's ready to go. He's trying to find any way to win he can. He's given an army of branches ready to go. A tree.
Yeah. We're not there. Not saying that's going to happen. But I think it would be a fair question to wonder as a Georgia fan of thinking, are we, after 3 consecutive years of missing the semifinal, because that's obviously what it would mean to miss the playoff, are we in jeopardy of falling back into that tier 2 when we thought we were a lock to be tier 1 every single year? And those questions would at least start to seep in a little bit of like, man, what has Kirby not done right to be able to kind of build on repeating in 21 and 22? And then Texas fans would wonder if Sark is ever going to be able to win the big one and if he should give up play calling duties. Because if Texas misses the playoff with Arch, there are going to be so many people saying, hire a play caller, bring in someone else.
If people say that about Steve Sarkisian, I'm going to lose my mind. Steve Sarkisian's the best offensive mind in football, man.
There are people already saying that after the Ohio State game.
People are so stupid when they talk about Texas. I'm not trying to be mean, but it's like they just don't see what's actually happening at Texas because that's not the problem.
I could go. It depends on how this plays out. I am not one of those people that is sitting here saying that because I have said so many times that Sark is a wizard, and I don't think that is the best path right now for where Texas is at to maximize its skill set. But if Sark felt the need to be a little bit more CEO, if there were other issues that were plaguing his team, and if he felt the need to bring in a disciple of sorts, and then he kind of gets to oversee the offense in the same way that Heupel does, in the same way that Kiffin does, and if he feels like that's what's needed for his team, I think that's a different conversation. But it's not one that I think we should be having yet. I think that they've been too good from a schematic standpoint to go down that road just yet.
And also, too, if fans and people start browbeating Sark about stuff like that, he will simply just leave for the NFL. Like, that's the type of market he has at this point, I feel.
I don't know. I'm not. That wouldn't be a chaos scenario I'd throw out. Just
I know. I'm not saying chaos scenario. I'm just saying, like, if people are getting after Sark for play calling, that's just wrong. I don't know.
It's seeing the way that it played out with Ryan Day. It's seeing the way that it played out even with Michigan, with Jim Harbaugh, and realizing there could be a different way to go about this. That would be the takeaway if Texas misses out on the playoff as a preseason number 1 team with all of this hype. Preseason number 1 for the first time ever since the AP poll has been coming out with a preseason poll since 1950. Like, that is just a crazy thing to process. And there would be some chaos if Texas went 8-4 and Arch wasn't living up to this impossible hype. That's chaos in itself. Those conversations about him would be all over the place. Probably could have made him just his own chaos scenario. And if he's elite, the chaos would be at the NFL level, and all these people being like, how could he not go to the NFL and be their number one draft pick? He's leaving this amount of money on the table. And also just conveniently ignoring that the NFL track record for 1-year starters is just not particularly good. And that would probably be factored into this. Even if Arch returned for 26, as myself, his grandpa, many others have speculated correctly, it would feel still like 2025 was a missed opportunity for Texas just because of the championship level defense. You don't know how long your guy PK is going to be there as your defensive coordinator, and that's just not a given with Sarkisian's background, that he's always going to have that box checked in the way that it feels like he does right now. Missing the playoff would create chaos for Texas. There's no doubt about it. It would create chaos for all those teams.
I will say really quick, something more chaotic than this happened last year. Two of those teams did not make the playoff last year, Alabama and LSU. So that being said, what is the least amount of SEC teams do you think that could get in this year?
I don't think there'll ever be less than 3. I think last year, if there was going to be a year, which that could happen, it would have been with how much parity there was within the conference. The way that it played out was just kind of diabolical for there to be a minimum amount of SEC teams with what happened in conference play. So I will say there's not going to be a year anytime soon in which only 2 SEC teams make the playoff. But I would argue that wasn't as chaotic last year, just because it was year one, Kalen DeBoer. It was still chaotic with the way that they lost those games for sure. But you yourself said that LSU wasn't a playoff team going into the season. So I don't think that was that chaotic with how it played out.
Yeah, it's kind of like a death by a thousand cuts thing, right? Where all these little things went wrong and it just ended in that scenario. But both conference championship participants are just going to make it because they had to have a good enough SEC record, which is pretty hard to do. If you have 4 losses, right? And so both of those teams are going to make it, and then there's probably going to be one at large kind of in perpetuity. So that's kind of one thing too, as I'm kind of talking this out, where it's everybody that immediately came out of the wings to dump on the SEC. Yeah, Tennessee, love you guys, but
was that chaotic? I don't know. I don't know that Tennessee getting to the playoff, and that's really all we can say that it did was just get to the playoff, because we know what happened once Tennessee got there.
Right.
Was going 10-2, not playing for an SEC championship, that chaotic? Did they disrupt the course of the season? Can you tell the story of 2025 or 2024 college football by leaving Tennessee out? I think you probably could. That sounds like a slap in the face, and I'm not trying to diminish that accomplishment, which was a great accomplishment to get to 10-2, even though your quarterback didn't turn out to be the guy that you thought he was going to be. And Heupel is great. He's established himself as an elite coach. Did that create chaos? I don't necessarily think externally that it did.
I think this year it would. But what I was saying about Tennessee is I was saying is love you guys, but that's probably about the worst the third SEC team is going to be, getting into the playoff, because that was a team that once they got an SEC play, their offense kind of sputtered. They had ugly loss with Arkansas and all that. So they're even a team. And again, I am a person who picked Tennessee to beat Ohio State because Ohio State had just played Michigan horribly. You know what I'm saying? When things happen and they change things, I get that. I'm not going to go cold take myself and be we all saw this coming. But at the same time, there was just a little bit more to like about even some of the teams that were left out at that point in the season. So point being, I just think that's last year is actually kind of the bottom as I'm talking this out, that a chaos scenario worse than last year doesn't really exist.
If A&M, Ole Miss, if those teams made the playoff, would it be chaotic? And if you were just told they're only going to make the playoff, they won't advance, and they're just they're at-large teams, I don't know that that's that chaotic.
For this year, yeah, I don't either, because I would struggle to see either of those teams doing traveling and winning a game at Columbus we saw, just because of how their offenses kind of work, and all that stuff. You need to be multifaceted to go on the road and win. And we saw that with banged up Dylan Sampson last year. It was well, this was kind of y'all's thing, and you couldn't do that, and so it was over for you.
It'd be an impressive accomplishment
to get there.
Mike Elko would probably have SEC Coach of the Year type buzz, and the conversations we could be having about Lane Kiffin finally getting to the playoff, that would be significant for those people specifically in those programs and those fan bases, obviously that would matter, but the impact that it would have on the rest of college football, probably not there as much, unless of course it's a great outlier and all of a sudden like one of those teams is 12-0. That's a different circumstance than being 10-2 and getting into the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Chaos scenario number 5. Florida does basically anything.
Sure.
Florida breathes.
Yeah.
Florida opens its mouth. I teased this already. They are the ultimate agent of chaos in college football because basically anything would be chaotic. And I think I mapped out in the Crystal Ball series, which you can go check out right now, SaturdayDownSouth.com, shameless plug. I think I mapped out the least chaotic season for Florida. 8-4. I did not project a DJ Lagway injury. I did project both an 0-3 start to SEC play, which would have Napier's seat on fire, and there would be a whole lot of debate about whether or not he's going to be able to survive this season. But I also projected a win against Georgia that would ignite this rivalry.
I mean, it was a hand of God that they didn't beat Georgia. That's true, to be honest.
Yeah. And in some ways, yes, definitely you could say that. So if that happens, and Georgia fans, relax. That's my only regular season loss that I mapped out for Georgia. But just imagine if that played out and the chaos from those fan bases, if Georgia got a first round bye, but it still included a loss to Florida, what that would mean for how we'd be talking about Napier. And again, all of this, Napier and Lagway are so synonymous with one another, and it's why we spent so much time talking about this. I realize that we've done that, and if Lagway hits the open market in the transfer portal, his value would just be through the roof. But seriously, Will, like, you give me any projection for Florida this year, and I can explain why it's chaos.
No, you're right. And again, how people view teams is so funny because Florida's getting all this love because they finished the season strong and Lagway. But again, the schedule is probably worse looking into the year because now some of these teams have improved, talking about Miami, Texas, what they were able to do, A&M over the course of the year last year. So the schedule is a little bit more daunting, I would argue, this year, even though the team is better. And you say, oh, you guys made all this progress last year, you should do better. I don't know. I mean, that being said, do you know Billy's contract situation off the top of your head?
About what his buyout is?
Basically, he needs an extension, right? After last year, they didn't extend him, did they?
No, he did not get an extension.
So what would be?
He got a vote of confidence.
Right, which could go a couple of ways. So what would be extension territory for him? 8 wins?
Because he's got 3 or 4 years left on his deal, on his original deal.
Okay, got you. So he had previously extended. Got you. Okay.
No, he hasn't been extended. He got a 6 or 7 year contract.
I got you. Okay, yeah, because usually you know how it goes. Guys have a good season, they get extended. Is where I was going with that, just for recruiting purposes. It's either you're on the hot seat or you're getting extended. Is kind of where I was going there, and so I think that would be their hope, is to say Billy's our guy long term. We survived the season basically. So what would survive the season be for him?
Survive the season could mean so many different things, and chaos could come in the form. Yeah, original deal was 7 years, $51.8 million. Mm-hmm. And he is entering year 4 of this
so you'd like
deal.
To see your guy get extended on that timeline for recruiting, usually, is where I was going with that. So
correct.
Yeah.
So that's where this can get really complicated. And we've seen Scott Strickland be willing to play the long game a bit with this, and that's with Mullen, the McElwain thing, which was just awkward from the jump, and the way that he went about that just so horribly, in the way that the post Citrus Bowl press conference after beating Iowa, and why McElwain chose that time to sort of puff his chest out to his bosses was just bizarre, but everything about him was bizarre. Yeah. Your ideal scenario, if you're Billy Napier, is you have the 8-4 type season that includes a turnaround, DJ Lagway looking the part, and you get that extension at season's end. Even if you are not in playoff contention late in the season, you will take that all day, every day. That is this playing out in a chaotically beneficial way. But even that in itself, then we get all these people that are wondering, why did Billy Napier just get extended when he's been on the hot seat each of the last 2 seasons?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to your point, it's you're going to be probably an underdog at Tiger Stadium, at Hard Rock Stadium for Miami, probably home against Texas, right? So I feel like even go, yeah, all of that's chaotic. Winning any one of those games would be chaotic. Losing all three of those games would be chaotic. I'm with you. I think that every week for Florida, and I'm glad that you bring this up now because we as a collective need to take a big
Yep.
breath. I'm sure people will do this about, Florida and the SEC and go, there really isn't a sane outcome here. Like the most sane outcome is exactly what we're outlining here, which is they have like an 8-4 season. They have a couple of horrific losses. They have a couple of pretty good close wins. That's what you have to do against the schedule to get to 8 wins. And everyone's just kind of like, we're kind of still in the situationship, but you survived.
Even 6-6, 6-6, he could survive. I firmly believe that. I really do. If Lagway looks the part, and this is a Florida defense that regresses, and it wasn't as good as it was down the stretch last year when it was allowing 13 points per game in the last 4 games, then there is still a path for Billy Napier to get another year, knowing that he would have he would have another. Would this be? Yeah, he would have 3 more seasons. Yeah, he would still have 3 more seasons on his deal. Wouldn't have to get extended. He doesn't have to get extended to answer your original question.
Yeah,
he doesn't have to be extended or fired.
Yeah, I was just talking it out because, like I said, about every other year, guys will have like a PR conference extension where it's like, hey, you're here long term. We're going to add a couple of years onto your deal. So it's just kind of weird that a guy's played that deep into, or not played, coached that deep into his deal. But yeah, I think that that's probably the most likely outcome, but I don't see him getting fired unless he does something horrific or like Lagway injures and the team spirals.
Right. So that brings us to chaos scenario number 6. Mm-hmm. SEC coach Armageddon. And I don't mean what Brandon Walker suggested by speculating that half the SEC could have new coaches. I'm not sure that he can count to 8, but Kirby, Sark, Lane, Heupel, Elko, Clark Lee, Beamer, Drink, DeBoer, that's 9 before we even get to Brian Kelly, who again has a $51.7 million buyout at the end of the year. And Brandon should know this, but Jeff Lebby, who is beloved by his athletic director. And even if he goes 2-10 again, and they, for whatever reason, puke on their shoes against like Southern Miss, who won 1 game last year, Northern Illinois, who's last in the country in percentage of returning production, and doesn't have Jordan Lynch walking through those doors. Even if that happens, he's probably still safe. Probably. I got to 11 coaches right there who I believe are safe, barring total disaster, fire with cause type scandal that comes up or something like that. That's 11 coaches that I think are safe. As we outlined earlier in the offseason with our SEC hot seat index, it's not half the conference that's going to get fired. Like that's just not the way that this sport works, because teams are not everybody's going to be that bad is what I'm saying. Like,
and furthermore, I would argue after last season, having 0 coaches fired is almost more chaotic, right? Because we've seen someone get fired almost every year. So what would you say is more chaotic? 0 coaches again, or over half of the league?
It just can't happen. It can't happen. We can't have 8 coaches fired in the SEC. That's just not how this works. 0 coaches would be chaotic, because who is winning in a given week?
That's the thing. It's like Stoops stays then. That's like when you really get into what every coach coming back is, it's pretty wild.
5 would be SEC coach Armageddon. No doubt. Like that's I think even 4 would be SEC coach Armageddon, because you've got Pittman, Freeze, Napier, Venables, Stoops. Those are the 5 that are going to get thrown out every single time, right? I set the over-under at 2.5 SEC coaches getting fired. That was a number that I actually saw. I was listening to the College Game Day podcast, and Dan Wetzel also set the number at 2.5 for Reese, who Reese Davis said take the under on that. So he's not necessarily predicting SEC coach Armageddon. We tend to usually overstate these things and not always understand the full context of how hard it is to have a year like that where 4 or 5 head coaches are on the move. And if you map out the schedules, getting to 5 is still really difficult because teams have to win games. Not everybody's just going to lose every single week.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thing about this sport. I'm saying that even though I only have one of those 5 coaches getting to 8 regular season wins, and it's Billy Napier, who we just talked about. If SEC head coach Armageddon happens, I think it would have to be 4 or 5 coaches, not 8. And the record is, I believe, 4 after 2019. And that came after a year in which there were no head coaching changes, 2018, post 2018 into 19. And
Really
obviously there were
quick,
no
before
changes
as you
this
say
past
that
season.
though, I don't mean to cut you off, but like a Pittman or Stoops walking away from the game, spending time with their family, retirement, you would count that as a firing, right?
No, it's not technically a firing, but we count it as a change.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think change is a good word because there are a couple of guys who have a pathway to just kind of do the Coach O and like kind of fade off into the sunset without actually technically getting fired.
True. Definitely true. Let's just call it changes then.
Yeah.
Let's call it changes, because you probably wouldn't be at that spot unless you had some sort of struggle at some point that led to that. You're not necessarily going out Nick Saban style. Okay.
Yeah.
If for the coaches that we're talking about who would be doing something like that, unless it's one of these coaches that we believe are absolutely untouchable, a 1 on the SEC hot seat index, I would not say that's like an exclusion. I would still count that as part of it.
Yeah. So I think that's at least beating 4, especially with 2, Texas, I think Sark is pretty safe, but Oklahoma is right there. So it's like just adding bigger, like 2 more wealthy, big fan bases, at least like big is a good word for both of them. Right. And so, yeah, just adding that drama, I think could certainly also just break the record.
Yeah. And especially the way that SEC jobs are valued.
Yeah.
It creates a chain reaction. It just does. There is always going to be that, and maybe there are a few exceptions to that of the lower jobs in the conference that wouldn't all of a sudden impact 3 other FBS jobs. But there's a reason why no coach has willingly left this conference for another since James Franklin.
Yep.
That's still going to be at the forefront.
So that he could get over the hump and beat top 10 teams is why he left.
That's exactly why I left Vandy to go to Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly right, Will. Good point. Chaos scenario number 7. The time has come. Groomers are more than groomers.
Oh, man.
Yep.
We're so back.
We're so back. Clip came through over the weekend. John Gruden wants to get back into coaching. Who would have thought?
He's uncanceled now. He's won the settlement.
That lawsuit's weird.
Yeah.
Really, really weird over the leaked emails that basically led to his firing with the Raiders. And I know he's got a team of lawyers that is seeking more on that front. There was a story on ESPN.com about that. You can read all about that if you care about that sort of stuff. I would still not bank on John Gruden getting an SEC job, even though, as he said at Georgia, he would die to coach in the SEC. I don't think it's just from that lawsuit, but guy hasn't coached college kids since I was learning how to walk back in 1991. Good times. I don't think Arkansas, despite all of that speculation, is pulling the trigger on a guy like that without knowing what they're getting with him. And lost in the shuffle of every groomer that's ever come out, guy hasn't won a postseason football game since he won a Super Bowl in the 2002 season.
Now there's
Are we losing sight of that? Are we just a little bit? He's a great football personality. I won't deny that. I think seeing some of the stuff that he's done at Barstool already is incredible. And I am glad that we have people like him that talk about this sport, because it makes me more excited to consume this sport. So from that standpoint, I totally get it. But Bill Belichick barely got a power conference job. Bill Belichick.
Yep.
Okay. Could Gruden get a job somewhere like UCLA? Would I say that is a 0% chance of happening? I wouldn't say that's 0%. I'd say that could be possible, maybe. I don't know. I doubt a group of 5 job would interest him with how disadvantageous that is. But if, let's say, Alex Golesh, friend of the program, left USF, that Tampa connection, people would make that, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Tulane would be fun if John Summerall left for, I don't know, Kentucky, because John Gruden was an assistant, an analyst, I believe he was, for your New Orleans Saints.
Mm-hmm. I helped us a ton, I'll tell you.
Sure. Who could forget it? He loves football so much, though, that the idea of him having that door closed is just not a pill he ever wants to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
Does he love football enough to get $3 million a year to go coach at a group of 5 school? I don't think so.
No.
That would be my guess. But groomers are chaos. And as we remember from 2017, there is no subject that is filling airwaves in November, quite like groomers. They're the best.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, it's a great note about his last postseason win because, wow, and even though we're much farther, even from 2017 to, there's more distance between now and his last success on a football field. His life and his job is less glamorous. Like talking about walking away from Monday Night Football, right? Versus like his current gig, which is sick. I'm not dumping on it, but walking away from Monday Night Football was a really big deal at the time. And that being said, just a little devil's advocate here. If I were to draft SEC athletic directors who would think about hiring John Gruden, two of them have their guys up. It's Hunter Yurachek and Mitch Barnhart. They've both shown to hire kind of wild, weird guys, and so and we've seen that with Yurachek, with bringing back Bobby. We've seen that you would bring it in Cal, and we've seen that with the Pope hire from Mitch Barnhart. And so at the end of the day, like those guys have kind of been chaos guys. So it wouldn't shock me for them to go that direction after kind of pulling the plug on one of their guys. So yeah, you never say never because some of this stuff is like, it's how much stuff has happened, even like the Venmo transactions. It's like for every 3 fake stories you see that you're like, that'll never happen. The Venmo transactions feels fake. So you just never know.
It would shock me.
Oh, it would be shocking. I mean, we're talking 5% odds here,
Don't get it twisted. I'd be here for it.
Yeah.
And for programs like ours, we would absolutely relish the opportunity to talk about John Gruden in the same way that we relish the opportunity to talk about Mike Leach, and the same way that we love being able to talk about Lane Kiffin and all the different personalities that are in the SEC. I love it. I'm here for all of that. It would be fantastic to know every single time we go to SEC Media Days, John Gruden is going to be there and he's going to be talking about football. That would be, trust me, I'm fully on board for that. Just always wonder who's putting a message out and why.
Yep.
Big thing.
Yep.
Okay. Chaos scenario number 8. Texas Tech buys its way into the playoff. I'm sure that language won't upset anyone. And I know what you're thinking. Doesn't everyone buy their way into the playoff, Connor? We have very open conversations about how much the contenders are willing to spend, and Texas is spending $5 bajillion on its roster this year, according to this source and that source and the other. Not everyone is Texas Tech. Not everyone is Texas Tech, aka the program that has not finished as a top 25 team since Mike Leach left, or was forced out. Craig James, you get it. Cody Campbell's changed jobs, relocated. Yep. Relocated and had a hiatus from coaching for a year. Cody Campbell's going to have a ton of eyeballs on him. The Texas Tech mega booster that we've talked about. We talked about with Jahan Jayaraja, who wrote one of the best college football pieces of the offseason, maybe of the year, about how all of that came to be in Lubbock, why they spent so much money to rebuild that team from the inside out, the vision of it. Pete Nakos reported for On3 that the roster will cost more than $28 million. And they acknowledged that they had to pay more because they were bringing guys to Lubbock and not to Austin.
Yeah.
Which, duh. Yeah. I think that's kind of part of the reason why it's a little bit harder to get certain programs off the ground as opposed to others. But
that's, maybe I'm jaded, but that's refreshing to me. I don't know. Like the guys that are like, look, you got to come to, wherever. I'm, not going to dump on any of the SEC places, but you got to come to middle of nowhere, Lawrence, Kansas to play football. It's like, I don't want to do that, dog.
Yeah, I always kind of get annoyed with the location arguments.
Mm-hmm.
But with transfers, I think it's a little bit different of acknowledging what the market looks like and acknowledging that there are certain geographical limitations to some places as opposed to others. I think it's that discussion's a little bit more prevalent, but I think people want it to fail because that's just kind of how we gatekeep in college football. If you're doing it in a different sort of way, it's, hey, you can't just do this. You can't just luck your way into something like this. If it succeeds with a playoff berth, that NIL market is going up. And until we find out that the College Sports Commission, the CSC, until we find out that they're actually able to step in and limit what collectives are doing, I still think that we could see significant market impact from a team like that. Because if Texas Tech can look at obvious roster holes, if you watch that Liberty Bowl against Arkansas, the roster holes were very much there. I think Arkansas is still running for touchdowns, last I checked. But
that dude ran so far, he's in California now.
Shout out Desmond James, doing really good things. But if that type of season happens for Texas Tech, suddenly the Purdue's, the Virginias, the Marylands of the world are going, why can't we do that? Not all of them have a Cody Campbell. Maryland might, because Kevin Plank, Under Armour, big deep pockets. They've been
That's
trying
a big L for them. I just want to say that, like, they should have really, like, Under Armour was really cool when they had, Steph and Cam and all that in the early 2010s. They should have done that with Maryland, exactly what Nike did with Oregon, because they lost their sparkle, and I don't know if they can get it back at this point. But like, if he had just gone full bore into college athletics, we'd be in a totally different world for Under Armour.
Under Armour not exactly seen in a positive light in college football.
Yeah.
Which hurts. Big excitement out of Auburn making that switch from Under Armour to Nike. That was considered a really, really big deal. So yeah, you're right. It's probably a missed opportunity for Maryland at this point. I don't know how deep Kevin Plank's pockets are as it relates to building a roster, because that was a lot of the conversation with them recruiting out of the DMV when I started this back in 2015. And some of the guys that were getting, like Dwayne Haskins was originally committed to Maryland, and that was seen as like such a big deal. Man, look at all the talent that they're getting in this very little window and the way that they're going to try and build this up. And that was kind of mini Texas Tech before all of that came, before the entire sport changed with how you can spend. But yeah, it will be interesting if this type of season for Texas Tech is what many, myself included, speculate that it can be, and how that impacts the rest of power conferences, knowing that there is a price to be paid. And in this day and age, if you're willing to pay it, you can be on the right end of that type of magical season that you haven't been able to have.
And maybe my perspective on this is a little bit different. Maybe I'm just wrong. I don't know. But like, if you're listening to this podcast, the chances are that you root for a richer team, right? Even if you are a Kentucky fan, you have a rich basketball team, right? Outside of kind of like Vandy, every team in the SEC is a rich team in some way. That what you care about, and you're good at it, right? And
Vandy's rich in academics, rich in baseball, rich in bowling.
Yeah.
Rich teams.
The things they care about, they care about. Like, that's the thing. They just haven't prioritized football, and they made no bones about it until kind of this recent couple of years. And so I say that to say, it never bothers me when kind of a poorer team comes up, because I only see that as stealing recruits from my rivals. Okay. So if they can get, I don't know, 10 guys to go to Lubbock, and you're, a Bama fan or an Auburn fan or an LSU fan, you said, oh, this is unfair. I remember when Colorado came up, and like LSU fans were like, oh my God, Deion, like, we're scared of him. I'm like, bro, like, if you really think that we're that cooked that we had to worry about Deion Sanders taking half our roster and going over there, what that's going to end up doing is leveling out the top. And unless you are Ohio State or Alabama or one of these like top 2 or 3 rosters, Georgia probably has some bones to pick with this, especially with Texas Tech. Like, you guys actually kind of do have a legitimate gripe because you're at the very, very top. But if you're like an Auburn fan or a Tennessee fan, it's like, bro, that's a guy that would have gone to Ohio State. That's a guy that would have gone to USC in previous years. And that's what I've never understood. It's like, you guys don't really know how to do class warfare or be kind of wealthy, because your competition is at the top. You're competing with other national champions. And when you stoop down and get mad at Texas Tech, it looks like you're scared of Texas Tech. It looks like you can't recruit against Lubbock. And I promise you, if Kirby Smart really wanted to go toe-to-toe with what they got going on in Lubbock, he would have done it. So, like, at the end of the day, you can't have it both ways. You can't be like, well, we didn't need that guy. It's whatever. And I'm scared of that guy. That's my only take.
There has always been a version of this in college sports. Michigan, the Fab Five, was a version of this back in the day. And why Michigan's going to be able to get these guys? How is Michigan going to have a recruiting class like this? That makes no sense whatsoever. They must be cheating. Turns out they were, but there's just always that bit of skepticism.
Michigan cheating. Insane.
Who could
Michigan
say, who would ever think that?
Breaking the rules of athletics.
With all that piece of apparel that they're wearing, how could they do that? But that is just going to be the storyline for Texas Tech this year. They're not getting away from that. And if they have a game where they lose and they let up 250 rushing yards or 300 rushing yards, people are going to be talking about that very much. Chaos scenario number 9.
Really quick, I will say this too, because it's also about history. So Texas Tech, to your point, doesn't really have a ton of history. We all remember one big Texas Tech moment, but what happened after that, right? And so what I would be more scared of from an NIL standpoint is a team like Nebraska, building up the facilities and now being able to use their money. So yeah, if you're a team with no history, even like Oregon is like, okay, win a playoff game or win a championship, and then I'll be scared of you. But that's just my take, is like, it just looks broke. Anyway.
Nebraska's lost 27 consecutive games to AP top 25 teams. Miss me with being scared.
Right.
Yeah. Just saying. Last win against an AP top 25 team, Barack Obama administration. People forget that. Chaos scenario number 9. Bill Belichick turns back the clock. And I mean from a football standpoint, not with who he's dating.
He's already done that. He's done it once. Can he go for 2?
Maybe. Some are saying if he goes 9-3 with a very favorable schedule, the NFL speculation will be all over the place. And I don't really like when the will they do this to go to the next level becomes the main topic of conversation in college football. Like when a college football coach, people just assume that they're going to leave and take an NFL job. Even the Lincoln Riley to the Dallas Cowboys speculation that was happening for so long, it just kind of gets a little bit old and it feels a little bit elitist, and I get frustrated with it. But with Belichick, it's obviously different. Mm-hmm. The over-under for UNC this year is 7.5 wins, but it's the over is plus 140. So obviously there are skeptics there. There are skeptics that do not think he will have a year to write home about.
That feels like a bet that casinos are built on, right? Where it's like, oh, you guys are going to throw some money on Bill Belichick this year? Go ahead, man.
Yeah. Oh, as you should. I mean, that's how you're able to make money in this day and age. Same thing with Colorado the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. Like that is what drives these markets so much. But just think about this. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't think UNC is going 9-3 for what it's worth. But imagine October 4th. Belichick welcomes ACC favorite Clemson Tigers, and he pulls off a stunner. Jordan Hudson, allegedly dating Bill Belichick, gives him a massive smooch at midfield.
That post-game handshake, I mean, like seismic, like Richter scale. Coached a great game today from Dabo.
Dabo, just the cheesiest sort of look into Bill Belichick's eyes, but also very defeated as well. Wearing that orange sweatshirt that he insists on wearing. It's early October. It's a little bit chilly maybe. Mm-hmm. Schefter reports that several NFL teams are already looking at him as a legitimate option, even though it's early October and front offices don't really have that figured out yet. Maybe it's equally chaotic to have 4-8 Belichick, who bails on press conferences, and we get weekly statements from Jordan Hudson talking about some misunderstanding and how he's the victim somehow.
That's actually what I want. You know what? I actually, as much as I want to root for the guy or whatever, I want 4-win where he's just like has to go address the media now because he sucks. That would be electric.
I don't know what the stipulations are going to be with that. I just know it won't be pretty, and it won't exactly be him getting up there and talking about, this is year one. We're building a foundation. We're doing everything that we can. He's not going to be forthright if that plays out.
Jordan will develop a Belichick AI that they'll talk to, and it'll just be sitting there on an iPad. That'll be great.
If she can do that, more power to her.
Mm-hmm.
That's chaotic, because then every college football coach is going to want to do the exact same thing instead of having to face the media on a weekly basis. So
yeah, let's actually censor that. We don't want to give them any ideas.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to human beings. Maybe I'm alone in that, but yeah, we won't wish AI upon anyone. Chaos scenario number 10. It's an obvious one. An SEC team fails to win it all. Feinbaum already said he's leaving the country if that happens. Also of note, his bucket list is pretty far and wide. He's got a lot of places he wants to hit. He's going to hit one of those places if an SEC team does not win a national championship. Also of note, last time that the SEC went 3 years without one of its teams winning a national championship, 1999 to 2002. Some would wonder if it's the 80s all over again. I never bring this up, but I always forget that the SEC only had one national championship winner in the 80s. It was Herschel.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Isn't that crazy? It's Georgia, but it was mainly Herschel. You guys know.
Yeah.
No disrespect, Buck Bellew. That's when real pandemonium would set in. I think if we saw 3 consecutive years of the SEC being left out, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean a specific team wins it, but I just think that in itself would be, oh my God, the conference. You thought last year there was panic after 2 years without a national title and 2 years without having a team in the title game. 3 years of no national champion. Even if the SEC puts a team in the title game, that would be chaos, and all of a sudden we're at a different era of college football.
Yeah, and I mean, I actually just rewatched Catholics versus Convicts the other day, and what a wild piece of media. But yeah, I when that got away from the SEC during the 80s, I think it's a really good point, because it all came down to regional recruiting, right? Talking about the state of Miami, guys that would normally have gone to, and maybe Florida wasn't even at that point yet, but guys are going to Florida State, Miami, over leaving to or staying in Florida and stuff like that. And I think that now regional recruiting is not like that really. Like it's hard to just lock off part of the state and say we're taking all of these guys. And so I find it hard to believe that the SEC can never, as we're kind of talking this out, get kicked back into the void and lose their foothold. But I do think, 3-0 is certainly not good. And people are going to be asking the questions, which I've probably said this on here before, but so funny to me that they've had Texas, which is like more money than God. And it's like, oh, the SEC's poor. It's like, okay, man. And so point being, I think everything will get flattened out. I don't think we'll never see a conference do what the SEC did in the last 20 years. And I think that just speaks to how great it was. That's hard to do in sports, period. Outside of like, most of the time you'll get like a one-team conference, like Kansas in basketball or something where they're just smoking everyone and then they face the national stage and that's the story. But yeah, I think competition will definitely get flattened out. But I think there are enough crazy people, enough money to where it won't last for long.
What's kind of funny though is if Texas does what preseason number ones have not been able to do the last 20 years, with the exception of 2017 Alabama, Texas wins the national title this year. It'll be 4 SEC teams that have won the first 6 titles of the 2020s.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be by 3 different SEC programs. And all of a sudden we'll be like, wait a minute. What are those conversations? Again, that's if Texas wins it all. That's a different story than if Georgia wins, in which it would be 3 and 5 years, and that's still considered a dynasty to do something like that. But how far away are we from that playing out? Because that's not chaos, in my opinion. If Texas wins a national championship, and if Sark is the next coach to get his first ring, and if Arch does that, I mean, there are definitely elements of chaos to that. But is it that far-fetched? That's what I always push back with these conversations. And maybe we'll get Doug Lesmerises and to talk about some of this, and Kings from the North, who have obviously taken so many shots at the SEC and just Southern football in general. But like, that's the point that I keep coming back to, is like, all right, so if that plays out, what is the conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Do you retroactively take all these things away? Because 4 out of 6 titles in a decade is still kind of a lot. We're not even getting into the 2010s, by the way, of like, oh, LSU won in 2019 with one of the most dominant teams ever. Like, to me, that still carries some sort of weight. And as long as that possibility is open, which it very much is for a team like Texas or Georgia or Alabama or LSU, then I'm not willing to move off of that just yet. I know we talked about that a lot, so we don't need to beat a dead horse too much there.
Well, this is really a razor's edge, though, because, if Texas wins, all the Big Ten people shut up and leave us alone. But we have to deal with Texas fans winning that soon after joining the SEC. I feel like they would be like Eagles fans are right now, where it's just like, okay, well, every column you write is going to be like, and where's the Texas guy? Oh, you mean the Texas guy isn't the best offensive guard in college football? This is insane. And so, I don't know. From your sanity standpoint, I think it's kind of a lose-lose.
Yeah, I mean, I get paid either way, so I'll take what
yeah.
I root for chaos scenarios because it makes my job more interesting.
Yeah,
I fully admit that. But
yeah, Texas at this point isn't one. That speaks to what Stark has done. That speaks to what Sark has done, where he starts off. He speaks. It's like he starts off a year, and they're even basura for a year under him. Getting all the resources, getting all the boosters in line. The fact that it's expected, or that it wouldn't be shocking that Texas joins the SEC and wins the national title, there is something to be said about that. But that's where we're sitting. It wouldn't be that shocking.
Who's the worst team that could win from the SEC for the anti-SEC crowd? What would be the most feared team winning a national championship this year?
I mean, not to be a homer, but like, so many people would need new material if Brian Kelly won.
I agree with that. I was hoping you were going to say that. It's Brian Kelly, because Brian Kelly left that region of the country specifically to win a national championship at LSU.
Now, scariest is DeBoer. Scariest is DeBoer, because it's like, well, now we got another one of these, and let's just all put it on the sim for the next 20 years. Why he would show up?
And now some would say, well, he won it with Nick Saban's players. Even though you kind of look at the roster.
Not anymore, buddy. Not in the transfer. Yeah. And people would say that, but they'd be wrong.
Yeah. He would definitely have pieces of the Saban era, of course. But I think that's a different conversation than, what Larry Coker did at Miami. Like, I don't think DeBoer would be in that same category.
Mm-hmm.
And that would, but I do think Kelly would be 1. And then it's probably DeBoer at 2. And then there's a little bit more of a gap for Texas, although it does create the the 4 and 6 years in the 2020s and the third different SEC school to be able to do that. And that would be a really, really tough bill for the anti-SEC crowd as well.
Yep.
All right, well, we have a conversation that you and I and Paul Martin had. Yeah, all three of us. Will on an interview.
Mm-hmm. With an actual lad from Britain. It was incredible.
It was. Some people have asked before, like, oh, why don't you have like Will on interviews and stuff like that? It's like, well, Will's not full time with us in his current role, and it's just always been kind of the structure of the show to be able to have this part with Will, and then interviews are going to be kind of me one on one with a guest. But with this background, it just made perfect sense for Will to be on this interview, and we had a lot of fun with it. So great conversation with Paul Martin, being able to talk about Any Given Saturday, which if you have not watched it by now, I'm sure you've at least started it at some point. So he's going to provide some insights, what kind of went on behind the scenes, a lot of decision-making stuff, really, really interesting stuff with him. So here is Paul Martin. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Paul Martin, the executive producer for the Netflix show that hopefully everybody's seen by now, Any Given Saturday. Paul, we are recording this 3 days after the series came out on Netflix. What has been the biggest takeaway from the feedback so far that you've gotten?
I think the feedback's been great, like really, really good. I mean, I think a couple of weeks before the show premiered, we did a big sort of press screening of episode 1 for, a bunch of, journalists and people at the SEC Media Week down in Atlanta. And I think that for me was like that was a nerve-wracking moment because, as you can hear from my accent, this world is not my natural habitat, and you make these shows and you think you're making good choices and you think you're trying to tell good stories and you think you've got a handle on the world and the characters, and then suddenly when you're sat in a room of well over 100 people that consume this world on a daily basis, you're suddenly like, oh my God, like, did we bite off more than we can chew? Do we actually know what we're talking about? Have we done a good job? And so, to come out of that and have nothing but really, really positive feedback. And listen, I've been in this industry long enough to know when people are kind of like, yeah, we really like it, but through gritted teeth. There was a genuine excitement about the show. The feedback was really positive, and it really felt like we were taking, even the most, grizzled, hardened SEC journalists that have seen everything. It felt like they were seeing something new, which is great.
It's a really hard thing to do because you knew this would be different than Full Swing and Drive to Survive, because you're talking about a regionalized demographic within the sport, not just the national sport as a whole. And because of how this is shot, like, everyone's going to know the results, obviously, by the time this comes out. So there's so much emphasis on this being shot well, because if you just shoot this and just kind of cut corners in that way, you're not bringing people in. So it's harder to have that true suspense. Yet as you watch this, you're like, man, I'm forgetting that the teams that you're filming, like Tennessee's the only one that's going to the playoff. And these teams aren't necessarily having national championship type seasons, but every game feels so meaningful. You didn't even have a fired coach in the SEC, but it feels like every game is kind of make or break. Did you and your team seek the SEC out to do this, or did the SEC seek you out to be able to just try and present this image of the conference that I think even in its quieter season still comes away really entertaining?
Yeah. I mean, so the sort of the chronology of it all was, obviously we've done a bunch of these kind of sport shows and I obviously was living in kind of Los Angeles. And so just as a company, we were doing a little bit more focused on kind of US sports and that kind of stuff. And then there was a conversation, and I can't even remember who it was, but someone brought up obviously college football, nothing new. And then, just started talking about the SEC. And I sort of, I'm a big enough sports fan that I had a vague notion of what the SEC was and what it was all about. And I understood that it was a big deal. And so we were like, well, let's see if they're even up for a conversation. And I think there was just that kind of perfect timing of, at the time that we approached the SEC, I think someone within the SEC had seen Drive to Survive, had seen the impact that Drive to Survive had the sport, and had actually been pushing Commissioner Sankey to say, "Hey, we should think about something like this. This might be good for." For the SEC, and so there was just this. It was almost kind of perfect timing. I think they'd started to think about that. We, became more aware of it, and so, we sort of tripped down to Birmingham, Alabama, and met Commissioner kind of for the first time, and really, listen, had to really go, from the basics of who we were and what we'd done and why we felt like, this could work in this world, and we were lucky enough that, almost from the first meeting, they were super receptive to it, but also super realistic of like, look, we as the SEC, we have a certain amount of control over the schools and the coaches and the teams. But when it comes down to it, it's going to be an individual school and therefore probably an individual coach's decision about whether that school wants to be part of it or not.
Absolutely. And on that same kind of tear, I have a bit of a two-parter here. We've seen plenty of documentaries about the SEC, and the critique is often this is kind of a PR piece, right? It's often you only get a certain amount of access. I think from Box to Box's history, the thing that's really stuck out to me is their ability to get into these intimate moments. Talking about Graham Mertz's surgery, right? Talking about getting in meeting rooms where even us as journalists, I mean, like, I don't know how many times we've seen the inside of an SEC meeting room where they're diagramming plays and all that. So how are you guys able to be in there without kind of getting suspicion or getting pushed out?
I think it's part of the process, honestly. I think, we're very clear of like, look, if we get the good stuff, we'll make something great, because I think all these worlds, whether it's Formula One, whether it's golf, whether it's SEC football, just sport, there is enough, there's enough character with great ego and stakes, and there's great narrative and there's great story, and so we're not, we're never worried about, are we going to go into a world and be able to find the narrative? I think it's to your point, Will. It's like, are we going to be able to tell it, in a way that makes the audience really feel like they're on the inside of that? And so we're very honest with people from day one about what this will take, and everyone wants it to be good. And it's like, look, if you are expecting it to just be a puff piece, then, we're probably not the right company, and it's probably not the right idea to do it. And that never means that, also the flip side, that never means that you're in it to, to hang people out to dry, or to, people are, in my job, I make, 100 decisions a day and probably get 50% of them wrong and 50% of them right. You know what I mean? And these coaches are no different, and these worlds are no different. Like, within it, you're going to see people make mistakes. You're going to see people get emotional. You're going to see people get that vital call, in a game wrong. But that's part of what people love. People love to see it, and they love to see a bit of vulnerability. They love to see that, oh my God, these SEC players or these SEC coaches that I put on a pedestal every Saturday and cheer my team on. You know what? They're kind of like me as well. Sometimes they hate their job. Sometimes they've had a row with their wife and they'd rather not go into the office that day. Sometimes their mind's just somewhere else when it comes to that. And I think it's that, like, once people start to understand that, I think that's when they really connect to kind of characters. You talk about, feedback. I've had feedback since the show came out of people with a very different perception of who Brian Kelly is and what Brian Kelly is all about. Brian's got this, amazingly tough kind of persona, which he takes onto the field at all times. And you just see him in a slightly different light. You see the interactions with his dad, you hear him talk about his background, and it suddenly just makes you go like, you know what? I don't like Brian Kelly.
Appreciate the PR work there as an LSU supporter. We have a lot of negative comments about Brian. Yeah. And one follow up to that really quick, would be part two, is that one thing that was striking to me when I watched Drive to Survive is the relationship between the stars and the media. Like, the Christian Horner scandal, for instance, when that's covered, every media member has got a hand up fighting over each other, asking him almost the funniest or most crass question. Whereas you go to SEC Media Days and there could be a scandal and there's a bit of a fear to approach these coaches. Could you just kind of, like, how did you bridge that gap? Did you see that same kind of difference?
Yeah, I think why these shows have worked is partly that. I think sport has become so sanitized, and those post match interviews, whatever sport you're in, have always been like, so tell me how you feel. Like, you just lost the biggest game, or you just lost the biggest race of your career. How do you feel? How do you think I feel? Like, is what they really want to say. But of course they go like, well, we're really disappointed, and we tried our best, and we had a great training camp, and they just reel out the cliches, and they'll tell you that, like, when you sit down. And that's why I think in some ways these shows are quite cathartic for people. They give people an opportunity to just pull back the curtain just a little bit more, so that people can really understand, what I said, that I'm a football coach. I'm not going to get every single decision every time right. Nobody does. And I think, there is that expectation that when you go and you see your team on a Saturday, you expect that your players and your coaches are going to bring perfection every single weekend. And anything less than that, and if it results in a defeat, then, there's hell to pay. And I think the players and the coaches they like to show that they're kind of human like us.
Paul, I always wonder with shows like this how difficult it is to shoot, because you obviously have a team. If it were just you and a few cameramen, and a director, like there's just so much more that goes into this that doesn't always meet the eye. But how are you able to shoot 10 teams knowing that there's probably going to be stuff that you miss? Ideally, you're there for moments that matter. I thought being there for that, you talk about Brian Kelly, like being there in that conversation in the car with him, with his agent, who's like Garrett Nussmeier's agent as well, and how impactful that is. But how did your team approach that? Like, can you give the audience a little bit of insight? Because I tend to think that we watch at home, assuming, well, you're just there the entire time shooting LSU from August all the way through December, and it's just so much more difficult than that.
Yeah, and I think the honest answer is, I don't think, we certainly don't have the budget or the resources to film all 10 teams from beginning of season to end of season. So you just have to be really smart about it. You have to have really good conversations in advance and really develop an understanding of what type of stories you want to tell about the individuals and the schools. And also in the knowledge that things will happen over the course of a season that you will have no idea will happen. Like, Vandy beating Alabama. I would love to say, we had a sense that was going to happen, and we didn't. But what we knew was that what Clark Lee and Diego Pavia were building at Vandy was exciting. Whether they won every game or lost every game, there was an energy there. There was a narrative there that was really great to watch. And so it was just for us trying to put ourselves in as many situations with a school like Vandy where we could find that payoff. Like, that's what you're always looking for on these shows. You can have a good idea of the narrative, but at some point you want that ending. And that's how I always look at these shows, of like, when we look at an episode, right, what's our ending? Where are we finishing this episode? And then we can almost work backwards from that. And sometimes if you've got it right, where you're like, we've got great character, we've got great narrative, and we've got this amazing ending. It's like the Vandy, like, I said to our guys in the edit, if we cannot land that Vandy episode, we all need to go home and do something else, because you've got great characters, you've got a massive underdog, and then they go and, perhaps the biggest upset in the last however many years of the SEC, and then the crowd carry the goalpost down Main Street. You couldn't script that any better. So, but that's, listen, that happens very, very rarely. I'd love to say that, that you have 6 or 7 episodes that play out like that. So you just, you're slightly gambling when you make these shows of looking at what you know and what you can control, but also have a good enough understanding of the elements that you can't control, and then just try to put yourself in as many good positions as you can, and look at it and be realistic and say, well, look, sure, we've got a whole entire season. but we've only got 7 episodes. So really, we only need 7 moments, right? If we get 7 great moments, we'll make 7 great episodes. And I think that's how we look at it. And same on Drive to Survive. If you look at Drive to Survive, you're like, yeah, there's 24 races and it's across an entire calendar year, but we only need to find 10 moments. If we find 10 moments, we've got 10 great episodes. And the great thing about Formula One is, like, you know, it's so dysfunctional that they find the most outrageous 10 moments that you can ever find. So, you know, that's the way of looking at it. Because I think if you take that, if you look at it as, oh my God, there's 10 teams and there's 12 games and there's LSU over here and there's Tennessee over there and then we've got teams that are not even in it. Oh my God, how are we going to break this down? But I'm always like, guys, we just got to make 6 episodes, 7 episodes of television. That's it. You know, and then it becomes more manageable.
Who was the easiest people to shoot, and why was it Shane Beamer and Diego Pavia?
I mean, Coach Beamer would just, from the first moment we met him, I mean, he walked in and I think him and his family were obsessed with that Netflix show Outer Banks. They loved Outer Banks. So Shane Beamer kind of walked in, and there's always, whenever you set up that show, we're obviously making it for Netflix, but we're not Netflix. Like, we're an independent production company. But for people that don't really understand our industry, to all intents and purposes, to Coach Beamer, I was the guy from Netflix. So Coach Beamer just came up and he was like, I got to tell you, that show Outer Banks, it was amazing. And you did such a phenomenal job. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Great. Amazing. And just so you know, I'll give you anything this year, anything you want, but I want a cameo in Outer Banks. And I was like, well, listen, let's see how it goes, shall we? But he was great. His family, I mean, you look at them, the picture perfect kind of college coach, his beautiful wife, his gorgeous kids, and what he did at South Carolina last year was amazing. Again, just a joy to go back and film with South Carolina kind of every time, because one, they just the doors were wide open.
The best.
But secondly, there was something amazing happening there. It was really, really impressive to see.
Talking about the structure within a season, or I guess a series, as you guys would call it, right? There's this temptation to start at year, 2000 BC and go chronologically and go, okay, well, these are the big players. So Drive to Survive, Lewis Hamilton, right? But the way that Drive to Survive started was very similar to the SEC series, where it's like, we're going to start with Haas. We're going to start with Williams. Same thing with the series, like with Any Given Saturday. We're going to start with LSU. We're going to start with South Carolina. Whenever you guys view a single season of television, how do you decide the sequencing of the episodes?
I mean, again, I think it goes back to, I mean, I think for us, it was, LSU as one of the bigger, arguably, the biggest school in the SEC, and in that conversation for national titles, it didn't go according to plan, last year, but that's the goal at LSU, to win the national championship. So I think it was important for us that the LSU were not, that first episode, LSU and South Carolina, you got on a kind of, on the bigger picture level, you just got a really good two sides of the SEC, the Premier League school with a really well-known firebrand coach, and then South Carolina, not the biggest program in the SEC or in college football, but with a charismatic coach, the son of a legend, and then they happened to meet on the first SEC game of the season. So that for us was the perfect elements, where we were always like, and again, whatever happens in that game, that feels like it's going to be a good first episode. And obviously, the game itself was incredible. It goes to, SEC, South Carolina have a, last second field goal to kind of tie it. And then, we're fortunate enough that, because we're not making a true documentary, we can hang that field goal up for about 30 seconds. So everyone's like, is it? I mean, it was, when we watched the first episode down in Atlanta, it was amazing to hear, every journalist in that room, knew the result, right? And they knew what happened. But when that field goal goes up, and like I say, it's like, and I could feel people like, and I'm like, okay, that's gonna work. That's really gonna work. And that's that's the joy of what we do. There's actually a joy in being able to retrospectively tell these stories.
Did you get feedback from any teams that weren't featured in this, and also over under 1 second before Kirby Smart said no to you?
Um, so I
That's
mean,
under.
I actually, speaking of Kirby, I saw, haven't heard direct kind of feedback, but I saw he did an interview, a couple of weeks ago, where he was actually, he was actually very complimentary about, the process, the show, and the reasons that Georgia didn't kind of take part. And I think, I think with all those schools, none of them were a immediate hard no. It always was a, hey, listen, and I think Kirby kind of spoke very nicely about kind of box to box and our history of work, and he sort of said, look, it wasn't about, we believed that these guys would come in and do a great job because they always do a great job. It was more, I always sort of say everybody, either individual or team, has just got to find the reason why they want to do it. And for some teams it's easier than others, and and very often those reasons, they don't have to make sense. Like, it can be, I just don't want to do it because I think it's going to, like, whatever, and we're never there to really argue with anyone about, oh, that's no, it won't be this, it won't be that. Like, if that's what you believe, then you shouldn't do the show. But listen, we'd have loved all of those schools that didn't take part to be in it. But also at the same time, we didn't lose any sleep over the teams that weren't in it, because we've been there before and we know we can make something great. And I'm hopeful that, those teams that weren't in it last year, if it goes to a season 2, may come in and do it this year. But if they don't, that's fine. We're completely comfortable with it, and we fully respect that.
How much footage did your team end up with? Because you cut it down to what is it, like 340 minutes, 350 minutes, or something like that. But you probably had like tens of thousands of minutes worth of footage the way that you had to shoot this, because shooting 10 teams like that over the course of months had to be a challenge. Like, how difficult is that? Like, how much more was there out there that you're like, oh my God, this is a great scene, but we just don't have room to include the full storyline the way that we'd like to?
It's always the hardest things about making these shows, is the stuff that you leave out, and sometimes you have some amazing stories that for whatever reason just don't quite land, in the series structure. I can give you an example of kind of Drive to Survive. The first year that we were making Drive to Survive, and it was clear that Daniel Ricciardo was going to be one of our main characters through that whole season. And I think it was the third race of the season, I think. And it was the Chinese Grand Prix, and Danny won the Chinese Grand Prix. And we filmed with him, and we had amazing access. We were in the locker room afterwards, and he's having a beer with his trainer Michael, and they're just like, oh my God, we just did that. It was amazing, right? And honestly, we came away from that Grand Prix and we were like, this is going to be the most incredible episode of all time. This is going to be brilliant. And then you get in the edit, and we just couldn't stand it up in the way, and not because it wasn't a great story. It just didn't fit the flow of the episodes. It didn't fit the overall narrative of the season, and so not one bit of that victory in China ended up in that first series. And it's the same on all the shows. It's those bits that, for whatever reason, and sometimes it's not because you weren't there and you didn't get it. It just is when you start to look at it as a whole, you just, it just flows better without it, or it just, and there's that thing of like the audience, they don't know what are those stories that are on the cusp and are on the bubble. So, you don't feel too bad about kind of leaving them out. But yeah, there was a ton of that stuff in this series, as there is with all of them.
Because I was wondering if like the Oklahoma Josh Heupel stuff was part of that, and if that was one of those things where it, like just didn't quite fit the arc. You introduced Oklahoma later into, or Tennessee rather, later into the
Yeah,
series. You didn't necessarily have that Oklahoma access, so you didn't have like the full side of it. Like if that
yeah.
was one of those things that you just couldn't quite make work within the series.
I mean, I think that was so sensitive for Coach Heupel that I think that they were not, because when I think that was one when we looked at the start of the year, we were like, oh my god, that's going to be gold. But again, to your point and what we talked about earlier, you've really got to be in there and got to be able to tell it in a meaningful way. Otherwise, it just it just looks like a kind of a highlights reel, after the game. So yeah, for whatever reason, I think it was, because I think it was something. Now everybody goes into these things and everybody has their own threshold of the emotional stuff that they'll really let you into, and that was a tough one because we did want to tell that story, from when we started the show, but ultimately, it for various reasons it didn't play out in the way that we hoped.
Looking at your filmography, you've worked with, not just passionate fans, but the most passionate fans in the world. So what is your opinion of, Southeastern United States culture, SEC fans, and how do they square with the F1 fans, the soccer fans, the golf fans?
Yeah. So I think, a huge part of this for me, from being from the UK, was as we went into it, there's certainly a perception outside of the UK about what the South and the Southeast in the US is going to be like, right? And and then having spent time, and been to these places and just had the best time of meeting amazing people, and everyone was so hospitable, and everyone really bent over backwards to help us everywhere we went. And we had such a positive experience of it that a huge part of it was, as we were making this show, we were like, look, we want this to be to be positive about the communities and the areas and the fan bases and all that kind of stuff. Because I think, there is wrongly, sometimes there is a perception of the south of the US. And so, I was really proud that I think we've done that, as I watched it on the service, and you really get the sense of why these communities and these schools, the fan base is so rabid, and the fan base is so emotional about it. And it's great, if it's the cowbells at, Mississippi, or if it's the toilet roll, the toilet paper at Auburn, or the Vol Navy, all that stuff. It's nuts, it's a nuts world, and we wanted to show as much of that as we can through a positive lens, not through look what they do down south. They like that, it's joyous. You go to an SEC game on a Saturday and it's joyous.
I was going to ask, what was the piece of footage that didn't make the cut that you wish kind of did? You kind of already answered that question, but what was maybe your favorite moment that you witnessed doing this, of like, dang, this is cool, and like maybe the moment where you realized this is going to play and we feel like we have something here?
I think it's two things. I think there's the moments that you have when you're there, and you feel, and again, sometimes you get that wrong, as the Danny Rick example, but I think it was, I mean, definitely the Vandy result. My phone was like, from Netflix execs, from everyone that knew that I was working on the show, literally my phone erupted of like, oh my God, Vandy, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, okay, we've at least got one amazing episode. And then I think in the edit, it was very much, I think it was some of the Coach Beamer stuff. I think that there's a shot of him in kind of episode 1 where they just narrowly lost to LSU, and he walks in the dressing room on his own. He just doesn't quite know what to do with himself. He's so emotional, and he just, that moment where he kind of looks up to the ceiling, and all that frustration and all that emotion is just all over his face. And he's completely on his own in the locker room. And I think it was seeing that in the edit where you're like, wow, what a moment that is. Like, just to your point, Will, like nobody really gets to see, that the rawest possible reaction from a coach in the moment of a heartbreaking loss. And so I think it was things like that where you were like, okay, there's really something here.
What are the plans for next year? I know you said like you kind of left it open ended. If this is going to be something that ultimately enough teams want to take part in, which I think after seeing the product, I can't imagine that there are people like, I really regret that we came off in a negative light. But are there any sort of tentative plans? And would you guys even consider tweaking to be like, let's just do 4 teams or something like that? Like, what are sort of those early conversations like?
Yeah, I think listen. I hope the show's got off to a very good start, and hopefully people continue to watch it. I think that's going to be kind of barometer. The main kind of barometer of it. That if it does well and continues to do well, then I think there will be appetite from everyone to do it again, and hopeful that if we do it again, there may be some new additions in it. And like you said, I don't. From looking at it, I wouldn't anticipate anyone that did it not wanting to do it again. And hopefully, we can turn some of those that didn't want to do it last year into taking part this year. So we would totally love to do it again. We had such a great time. I think we're really, really proud of the show. And it's one of those that I having sat in the edit and watched these episodes 100 times. When it came out on Tuesday, I sat and I watched the whole thing on Netflix and on service, and I don't do that on every one of our shows. And I enjoyed it, and I got emotional about some of the episodes, and so it's a really good show, and I just hopefully as many people have seen it by now, but please continue to watch it and tell your friends and anyone, because every eyeball, counts.
So this might be the one kind of inside question here. Connor, you can tell me to skip this sort of if nobody cares. But one thing that was really intriguing to me is the sounds of SEC football. Like, we go into South Carolina, and I bet you guys had to painstakingly get every ounce of Sandstorm, the song that they play. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. And so in my mind, I go, okay, well, they got an approach here. Then we go to Florida, and the whole stadium is singing Tom Petty. And you guys weave that in so beautifully. So how did the sound play into this piece?
I always say to people that the sound is the most important thing on these shows, and whether it's the sound of because you want, because people consume these sports live and over a weekend, so we want to be bringing something different, and we've obviously got an opportunity where we can really dial up the sound of it, whether it's the sound of the crowd, whether it's the sound of those hits, whether it's the sound of the Formula One engines, whatever it is. We've got an opportunity to do things that people can't necessarily do in the live. But then it's also just the sound of those little half conversations, those little bits that get picked up on kind of the mics that sometimes you don't realize it at the time. And that's what really elevates those shows is when you get back and you're scrolling through the mics and the maps and all that, and then we've built, not necessarily on this show, but on Drive to Survive, we've built episodes around conversations where we've gone like, oh my God, Zach, and I think again, go back to series 1. I think there was a famous episode between kind of Cyril Abitbol, who was the head of Renault, and Christian, and with Cyril obviously stealing Danny and Christian stealing the engine, and they met right before a kind of a press conference, and we hadn't really realised what they, how much shit they were talking to each other until you get it back and then you listen to the mic and you're like, oh my God, we can build that episode off of that entire conversation. So the sounds, the visuals. Listen, the visuals are clearly important, but it's the sound. Like if you're not capturing, enough of those conversations, if you're not doing justice to the sound of the environment, then you've got no chance.
It's really well done. I think anybody that's sitting here in August that just can't wait for football to come back, they watch shows like this, and it's a reason why Hard Knocks has been doing what they've been doing for 20 years, and why that there is just such a market for this. Even though, like we said, we know the results already, but stuff that's well done like this, the behind the scenes stuff, like I can't get enough of it. I said it the other day, and think it's really impactful, and it's cool to see that the SEC was willing to take on something like this. Just one last suggestion for you: if you're looking for any additional talking heads, I know a guy. Like, just wanted to throw that out there, just in case.
We also have an SEC podcast, just to let you know.
You want to steal, you want to use any of our audio at any given moment, just send me a little message. We'll hook it up. We'll do what we can for you. But really appreciate it, man. Good luck with everything that you got going on, and hopefully we're going to be able to get a season 2 of this and get to see even more of this stuff.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Really appreciate it.
Good talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Well, let's close with some lad of the week. Who you got?
So I usually hate talking about this story, but in this case, I will. Lad of the week is Travis Kelce, who was just famously used to kind of be a prop to drop his girl Taylor Swift's new album. And it's funny because
really, I didn't hear anything about that.
Right, exactly. It's everywhere. I got to give them marketing props because this is just a transactional. It seems they are normal people who are in love, not dumping on that part of it. But every element of this has been so well done. If you guys, I've tried to avoid it and I just can't. I've even muted Taylor Swift and I just cannot avoid it. The way they're able to blast people with content is honestly insane. But the way they're able to blast people with content is like better than the Kardashians. I'm going to be honest. I thought those levels would never be touched, but these are actually talented people, and that helps. I will say that being talented actually helps you if you're that great at media. And so basically they had a podcast together with kind of both Kelsey's. She announced her album, and we've kind of seen the transformation of Kelce, Travis, which I think is pretty interesting. How there's the picture of him before Taylor, where he had the fade and everything, and then now he's got the boyfriend sweater on. He's debuting album. So again, like I said,
he's got the fade. He's still got the fade. By the way,
he's got the fade, but he had like the fade. He had like the Ayo fade. Like he was. It's so funny. He's a funny guy to watch get famous, because he clearly never expected to be famous, and neither did his brother, and they've handled it so differently. Whereas like it feels like Jason is almost more regular now. Like he met his wife on Tinder, and like he's just one of the boys like out here fighting people or whatever. And it's like Travis is like grappling with, like, I'm gonna be photographed everywhere I go, so I probably need like a stylist. I probably need to like not try too hard so I don't get. So yeah, I think it's just a cool way to kind of ride into retirement for him, and I'm happy for the lad. It seems pretty cool to just be able to be like, hey, I'm having my girl on the podcast, and it's gonna be it's gonna do numbers. It's gonna change everyone's lives. So good for him, man.
I don't want to assume anything. And by the way, that pod, if you are listening to this on Wednesday, maybe you listen to this and continue listening to this before that drops Wednesday night. You do what you will with your own podcast feed. I know I personally will be listening to it.
Just listen to this entire one first is all we ask you.
Yeah.
If you want to get the Taylor Swift Kelce pod. Yeah.
Just listen to it twice. I don't want to assume that I know how this is going to play out, but yeah, it'll be the most downloaded podcast in the history of podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Like bar none. It's not even close. And I do not say that as a hater. I do not have Taylor Swift muted. I am a fan. I've been a fan for 15 years.
That mute feature, Connor, if you got into that, you would live a life where you with no stress. That's there's a couple, dude. I've had LeBron muted for like 10 years.
I have had a lot of things muted.
Oh yeah.
We don't need to go down that road though.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people muted too.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't know it. There is still going to be so much attention on them forever as long as they're together. And honestly, my take that I've had on the Kelce brothers and the way that this is all unfolded with Travis dating Taylor and all that, I'm actually still more sick of Jason than I am of Travis. Is that bad?
Why?
Jason's he's on every commercial all the time. And look, I have nothing against Jason Kelce, but every single time he's on a commercial, I'm like, all right, we're still doing this. I get it.
It's like when you're known for being the relatable guy. It's kind of like what happened to Pedro Pascal. It's like everyone likes him. Let's put him in everything. And then we get sick of him. But I truly think that Jason Kelce is just kind of along for the ride. And he knows that kind of after 3 or 4 years from now, he's not going to be in the spotlight like this. I don't think. I think he's going to get tired of it.
Oh, I think he will.
You think so?
No, I think he will. Yeah, I think he's got 20 years of being a pitch man. Now,
he could be the next Billy Mays. He kind of looks like him.
Yeah, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
He's so much better at this than Gronk, who is just like one of the worst scripted people I've ever seen. And inexplicably, people continue to hire him to do these scripted commercials that are so awful.
He's like
and
McLovin, bro.
cringe.
Like once you like, he just plays Gronk in commercials. He's like, "What's up? I'm Gronk. I'm gonna spike
He's
your
playing character.
Gronk deer."
He's so bad. He's terrible.
Mhm.
Rob Gronkowski should not be on a commercial moving forward. Jason Kelsey has every bit of talent to do all that stuff. So I'm not even saying it from that standpoint of like, why do these brands keep doing it? He's just everywhere.
Yeah.
And I've kind of had enough of it, as opposed to Travis is everywhere because people are putting him everywhere in a different sort of way. Anyway, what were we talking about again? Yeah, I'm going to listen to that podcast. I don't have any shame in it.
Mhm.
Whatever. My lad of the week is Arkansas legend Cam Little. 70-yard field goal. 70. I don't care that it's a preseason game. You could have, if that came out with him doing it in practice, we would have assumed it was AI.
Mhm.
There's no way we would believe that a 70-yard field goal. It sounds so weird when you see the yard line of where he's set up and how weird it looks. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I tweeted out that should count for 3 Arkansas wins this year.
Facts.
No reason why it shouldn't. His teammates were so fired up too. It was cool. It was really, really cool. Preseason football is what it is, but that moment was absolutely awesome. And Cam Little was awesome at Arkansas. Like, I think we forget, and maybe I should have talked about this when it happened. He left college early. He left a year of eligibility on the table and got drafted as a 20-year-old kicker. That is really impressive.
Seems like he made
Really
the right
impressive.
decision. I'll be honest.
Yeah, was awesome as a rookie.
Mhm.
And, fully expecting to break that record. 66 yards is the record for a regular season game. Big day for Lane Kiffin, too. He had the 76-yarder that he attempted with Sebastian Janikowski. I mean, the kick was 15 yards short, probably even more, actually. And many since then have been saying it is not physically possible to make a kick that long. Cam Little just showed us that anything is possible. And if I'm just speaking from an unbiased standpoint, I think you got to credit the head coach
Mhm.
for sending him out there, being willing to have faith in his guy like that in that spot at the end of the first half, knowing that if it goes wrong, we will talk about Liam Cohen in the same way that we talk about Lane Kiffin nearly 20 years later, and about how dumb it was to send a kicker out there for a 76-yard kick.
You know, man.
How that defined his tenure.
You know, man, not to do like the Mike Greenberg fixes baseball thing this close to the season, but I think it would be nice, especially in the NFL, to have like 65 and up or like 4 points. I would be so down with that because it would just, the math doesn't make sense to even attempt a 65 plus field goal right now. But if there isn't a possession, like if it's like, oh, touchdown, you could trade it and get the 3 back kind of, or get the 4 versus the 3 and not be down 3. I would love that because if you're going to be kind of dumb enough to trust your guy, the other team gets the ball like in the red zone almost.
Can you imagine what the anticipation is going to be every single time a 60-yard field goal or like a 65-yarder's in play with Cam Little, having seen him make a 70-yard field goal?
It's going to be so bad for sports covers that you get 70-yard kicker. Why you just kick 70-yard field goal, dude? Come on.
I can't wait for the first game that they have on national TV, and they show the range that you got to get to have a chance. And it's just for a 70-yard field, just everything from the 50-yard line.
Mm-hmm. It's a touchback.
And that's the green area.
Yeah. There's going to be, as football advances, they're going to make the touchback move up, and the kickers are just going to get more freaky. You're going to get to a point where you just fair catch and kick the ball.
Yeah, that's basically what you do at this point anyway. So, yeah, Cam Little. Unbelievable. All right, schedule update. Good news. This is the last time for the rest of the year, at least unless something comes up that I can't foresee right now. But this is the last time that we're only going to have 1 pod a week. 2 pods a week starting next week. And next week, we are recording on Monday and Thursday. Now, that's going to be different than what we're doing in the season. But for a non-game week, Monday and Thursday is going to be the plan. And then we're 2 pods a week rest of the season. Recording on Wednesday, recording on Sunday. That is what I've been waiting for. Because I'll be honest with you guys, and I've talked about this, I do not like just doing 1 pod a week. And if it were my decision entirely, we would be doing 2 pods a week. Okay. I'll leave it there. Will knows that. Hopefully all of you listening know that. But we will be going to 2 pods a week next week. And I'm excited. we're here. We're here, Will.
Same here, man. Let's go.
Yeah.
I don't have to go to Clemson, South Carolina this year. I'm very excited about that. Going to Chicago. So maybe I'm cursing Brian Kelly.
You might be.
Yeah.
You very well could
Before
be.
me, it was all good with Brian Kelly.
Wait, because you've been to every single one of LSU's openers in the 2020s, but you weren't there for Mississippi State.
Wasn't there for Mississippi State, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Or UCLA.
So it's just Brian Kelly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you weren't there for UCLA. Yeah, you're good. No, it's definitely not a U thing. It's a Brian Kelly / LSU thing for sure. As I mentioned at the top, promo code SDS2, Dabble, $10 in bonus cash. No deposit required. If you're looking to get into the daily fantasy space, Dabble is the place to do it. Please, 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 if you have not, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.